Welcome into the College Football Overtime Podcast. My name's Garrett Chapman. His name is Abe Gordon. We're up to episode 45, Abe Gordon. We've been cooking. It's been a lot of fun covering all things college football with you, my friend. We might need to do something for episode 50, but we are cooking, we are rocking, we are rolling, talking all things college football. We got a lot to get into today. A lot of coach talk today, as we finish up with the spring period. Spring practices are over. Spring games have come and gone. And now it comes with the long wait to the college football season and whenever we kick off practices coming up here this summer. But we'll get into it. We're going to talk about some coaches who are going to win early. Maybe some coaches who might struggle in their first year as head coaches at new programs. Plus, we have our top coaches in college football, and we're going to get into all of it right here on the College Football Overtime Podcast. But before we do that, like I do every single week, Abe Gordon, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, man. The portal's open. We're feeling good. People are shifting, reaching out for those NIL deals. But it hasn't been as crazy as some people maybe thought it would be. So it's been pretty easy to follow. So you and I have both been on top of that, and
Yep.
we're ready to get this thing going, man. I think I saw a commercial for the first 12-team playoff yesterday. It was the first one I had seen, and I'm like, all right, man. Like, I hope you don't ramp me up too much. I might be running through a wall.
Oh, man, I think I saw the exact one that you did.
It was during the draft. We were both watching the draft, so yeah.
We were both watching the draft. So we did see it. Dude, I am very excited about that. I think that was with the College Game Day that they were doing right before. So it's like you have your college football fans who are going to be watching that. Of course, with the first edition with Nick Saban on the cast officially, and I think that's going to be a lot of fun. I know we're not going to get too deep into College Game Day discussions or whatever, but at the end of the day, Nick Saban, I think, did a fantastic job on that set. I was very impressed with him. But one other big piece of news this week, Abe, that I do want to get your thoughts on really quickly before we really kick off this episode. Reggie Bush, he got his Heisman back. It was about Tuesday of last week, but Wednesday of last week. I thought very hard about doing an emergency podcast for it. But at the end of the day, I felt like this was a long time coming. I felt like this was something that a lot of people expected. I know when we did the conversation about Johnny Manziel and how he was going to boycott the Heisman ceremony, I don't think that had anything to do with why the Heisman Trust decided to give him back his Heisman Trophy. But I think it's long overdue, and I think it's a good thing that they did it.
Yeah, I mean, a couple things here. Like, it's not like any of us treated Reggie Bush like he wasn't a Heisman winner, right? Like, he didn't have the physical trophy, but we all knew what he was in the years that he was dominating at SC. So that nothing changed from that perspective. And then, yeah, like maybe it had something to do with Johnny. Maybe it didn't. I mean, I do think the Heisman Trust didn't want to get into a situation where Johnny can recruit multiple other guys. And then it really becomes a thing. And quite frankly, the state of the game where we're at today, like it just no one views what he did as a big deal. And so they made the right and proper decision. A decision, like you said, should have been made a long time ago. But glad to see Reggie Bush back in the fold. And now the next step for him is to see how things play out in the Heisman House commercials, because you gotta get him involved now too. So I look forward to the storyline of him being on a milk carton or something like that.
Dude, I think they're going to do something, and it's going to be fantastic.
They better.
Very excited for something like that. But let's jump into this, Abe Gordon, because I have a lot of thoughts on some of these guys. Because let's just go through this list. So the group of Power 5 coaches who now have jobs at big time Power 5 programs. So you've got one, Kurt Cignetti. He's Indiana. Willie Fritz at Houston. Jed Fish at Washington. We've got Kalen DeBoer at Alabama, Mike Elko, Texas A&M, Brent Brennan at Arizona, Sharon Moore, Michigan, Jonathan Smith, Manny Diaz, Bill O'Brien, Jed Fish. We got a great list of coaches, and I want to go through this with you and just kind of talk about some of the coaches who might win in year one, because last year we see a guy like Jeff Brom, head coach at Louisville, and all of a sudden Louisville is on the map. This was a top 10 program. This was a team that really by the end of the season was flirting with the idea of going to the college football playoff. They dropped a couple of games down the stretch and that wasn't able to happen. But they played an ACC championship game. It's a huge success in year one of Jeff Brom at Louisville. And I wonder if there's any coach out there that could have that level of success. Now, winning is not the only case of a successful first year. You look at a lot of different programs across college football. Some of them need a little bit more help. You look at Michigan State. You look at a place like that that's been struggling for a little while, that needs to build up a foundation. You look at other places like Washington, places that lost a lot of talent, places that I don't know if it was as much. I mean, Kalen DeBoer gets a lot of credit. You lose your head coach, but you lose your quarterback, you lose your entire offensive line, you lose both your wide receivers, you lose your running back, you lose everything. And so I think all of these are at different levels here. But let's just talk specifically with wins and losses. I think that's just the most quantifiable way to do it because it's hard to really compare a Brent Key at Georgia Tech to a Jeff Brom at Louisville because all things are not created equal, especially in college football. But let me give you 4 coaches who I believe will win year one. 4 coaches. Number 1, let's go to Brent Brennan at Arizona. He, I think, walks into, outside of Kalen DeBoer, the obvious one. I think he walks into the best situation in college football. You've got one of the best young quarterbacks in college football right now. You have a ready-made schedule. You're walking into a brand new division where, look, no one really knows what to expect, but I think Arizona, fresh off of a top 15 finish, I don't even know the last time they finished in the top 15. I don't know if it's happened more consistently where they finished in the top 15 in my lifetime. But Brent, I think he's walking into a very interesting situation, one that Jed Fish left behind. What say you?
Yeah, for every name that you give me here, Garrett, I'm going to look at it from 3 perspectives. The first one is what's the amount of talent that they are walking into on the roster. Kind of tied in, but I will separate it for number 2. Do they have a quarterback?
Mm-hmm.
And the third one is what does their schedule look like? Is it passable? Are they changing conferences? Is that an upgrade, a downgrade, that sort of thing? So I'm going to look at all of them, no matter what name you give me from those 3 aspects. Look, I'm not going to pretend to know the entirety of the amount of talent on the Arizona roster, but they have a quarterback and they have a schedule that is manageable.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, they were headed towards number 15 overall, maybe even top 10 if the season had played out a couple more weeks. And so I tend to believe that the talent is there. Did they lose a little bit in the transfer portal? Sure. But not like an incredible departure. So yeah, I tend to agree with you when you're bringing a guy like Fafita back into, again, as you mentioned, a schedule that's manageable with some talent around him. There's no reason that I mean that team might be in that discussion again with a 9, possibly even a 10-win season.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens with them next year. One other one, Mike Elko. That's a coach that I've been really high on just throughout this whole process. Somebody who I thought was really good at Duke. I thought he had he had a great quarterback and great quarterback play. But to your point, really trumps everything. Riley Leonard, of course, he's not going to be following him to Texas A&M, but I do think that you're walking into a really talented program. You're walking into a place where you had a lot of success as a coordinator. And the SEC is in a state of flux. I think you lose Nick Saban. And the moment Nick Saban walks out that door, opportunities open up. So if I'm looking at a Brian Kelly, I'm looking at Kirby Smart, I'm looking at guys at the big programs. But one other one who is also a big program when it comes to spending, when it comes to recruiting, when it comes to fan support and booster support is Texas A&M. It's a program that has not yet been able to take that next step, one that they expected to do with Jimbo Fisher, but never really were able to put it all together. But I will say the best seasons that Texas A&M consistently had were when this guy, he was the defensive coordinator. He was calling plays on defense. They had elite play on that side of the ball. And then he leaves and he goes to Duke and he takes Duke to the next level. And I think he got Duke up to defensively, especially to a spot where they were competing on a week in, week out basis, despite the fact that Riley Leonard wasn't even playing for a good portion of the season. And if he wasn't nearly at full health. And Mike Elko had Duke at that level. And if you're able to do that at Duke, I have full expectations that you're going to come into Texas A&M with all of that talent year one and you're going to have a good bit of success.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit slower burn for Elko. I do think they were hit pretty, unlike Arizona. I think A&M was hit decently hard by the transfer portal, at least in terms of the top tier talent. I don't know if Wegman's the guy either. Like I truly believe that Noah Fafita can get the job done there at Arizona. I don't know if Wegman is the guy I necessarily trust to elevate the program. And then the third part that I'll continually bring up here as we continue these discussions. You're playing in the SEC. You got LSU, Alabama, Tennessee. You got Miami in non-conference, and who knows what some of the other programs are going to be. I didn't know. I don't know if they play Ole Miss, but they do play Mississippi State. They do play Ole Miss, so it's just very, very difficult schedule. Look, first year, like I think you're always like to set a base for first year coaches is you want to get bowl eligible. I think that's realistic. I'm not sure how much better than that. Could he coach them up to like 8 wins potentially? But that feels like that's close to the ceiling for this team.
Yeah, just the schedule itself, I think, doesn't set itself
big
up.
problem.
That's a big deal. It's a big deal. So, and we go back to one of my original points when we talk about a Jeff Brom. That schedule laid itself out pretty effectively.
Right.
And the deeper that we get into a lot of these discussions throughout the course of the season, or the off season, I should say, not the regular season. We're not there yet, but the deeper that we get into that, the more I'm going to start really parsing through those schedules just to see if there's anybody who lines up to that level. I know one that we talked about in a previous podcast was Fran Brown at Syracuse.
Mm-hmm.
I just think there's not enough talent there on that roster to really elevate them and take them up over the top. I don't think necessarily Fran Brown has that. Plus, he's a coach who he's never been a head coach before. So I don't know if he's going to be able to do that. But the schedule, that's one that I have looked at, that the schedule lines itself up pretty effectively. And but Mike Elko, I think he's going to be one of these coaches who he's going to be judged by what he does on the football field, wins and losses. There are no moral victories at Texas A&M. And especially over the last decade or so, after Sumlin came in and he really like teased what they could be. And Jimbo Fisher did the same thing in 2020. I mean, we saw glimpses of what this team can be, what this program can become, but we have not seen them put it all together. And we'll see if Mike Elko can be the guy who actually puts all those pieces together. I think he's a damn good coach. I think he's going to coach up a hell of a defense, and that's going to keep them in a lot of football games as soon as year one. So I think that's going to be a very fun team to follow at the very least. One other coach who I think is going to win at a very high level is a guy also in the SEC who has probably the most difficult job in college football. And it's the same thing as following up a Frank Sinatra, following up a Bill Burr, like one of those like elite level, like unbelievable entertainers. Nick Saban is the elite of the elite of the elite. And he's the greatest coach of all time. The guy won multiple national championships. The dude, when was the last time he had a sub 10 win season? Was it 2007? I mean, the guy was unbelievable. No one's ever going to question the greatness of Nick Saban. But what we can question is what that program looks like in the absence of Nick Saban. And Kalen DeBoer is a guy who, just like Nick, has won everywhere he's been. I mean, he went 3 NAIA national titles. I mean, he went 67-3 during his seasons up at Sioux Falls. Then he goes to Washington and he only goes 25-3 and loses to Michigan in the national championship game. He beats Texas twice. He wins 2 New Year's Six level bowls. The dude has won everywhere he's been. But now he's walking into the Crimson Tide. And I mean, people say that he's going to have to follow up the legend, but at the same time, this is without question the best roster that he has ever had. From a talent standpoint, Kalen DeBoer is walking into the best situation in college football. Now, his first introduction to the SEC is the University of Georgia coming into Tuscaloosa with Kirby Smart. And that is going to be a very interesting game. Probably one of those games where College Game Day is absolutely going to be there. We're going to be looking at really, really one of the most exciting things that we're going to see in 2024 is that game in Tuscaloosa between those two programs. And that's where we're going to learn everything that we need to know about Kalen DeBoer. But anybody who thinks that this program is going to take this seismic drop and they're just going to fall off and all of a sudden not be able to compete for national championships. They don't know Kalen DeBoer.
Well, the question is going to be, to me, at least in year one, less about Kalen DeBoer and more about Jalen Milroe. Are we getting the Jalen Milroe we saw from about week 7 or week 8 throughout the playoffs, or are we getting the Jalen Milroe we saw at the start of the year and the Jalen Milroe we saw in that final game loss to Michigan? What is the progression that he's taking? Because I still don't know if this guy is supposed to be the number 1 pick in the NFL draft, or he's going to be taken around the same range Spencer Rattler was in the 5th round. Like, I really don't know what the floor is for him and what the ceiling is for him. And they've got to get the best out of him, because I think it is, at least early on, going to be about that offense for Kalen DeBoer. This is what worked for him at Washington. And look, probably had a better quarterback at Washington, definitely had a better trio of receivers there at Washington. So you look at what he's got to work with there in Alabama. He's got to find a way to recreate it. They got to continue to pace this team, pace the conference really, and be in the high 30s, maybe into the 40s. And that's the question. Is Jalen Milroe the quarterback that we saw at times last year who could do that? Or is there a regression at some point? And so this one's a really tough one, because Jalen Milroe was in the Heisman discussion for parts of this season last year. If he's in the Heisman discussion again, then I agree with you. Like, Kalen DeBoer can have a really good year, potentially 10 wins, assuming, Georgia happens, and then, who knows what else. But if he is the quarterback that nearly got beaten 3 times in the first 4 weeks of the season, including having to be completely benched against South Florida, it's going to be a long, long season. And so as much as I want to make it about DeBoer, and it is, because he's the one coaching, he'd be the one calling plays and developing, it really comes down to Jalen Milroe, in my opinion. If he goes, this team is going to be very difficult to beat. But if he takes a step backwards, I think they're there. They can be had.
Yeah. And I think this is the schedule. I know you mentioned that for a couple of our teams, so I wanted to take a look at it, and it doesn't do them many favors.
No, but it is manageable for them.
It's manageable for a Nick Saban-led team, one that we understood like what that mentality
right.
is.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's manageable if it's the team that we've seen in recent years, or that quality. That's fair.
And that's not a knock on Kalen DeBoer. It's not a knock on what he could be or who he is or whatever. It's more just there was this certain fear factor that was involved with Nick Saban-led teams when he was at LSU, when he was at Michigan State, Alabama, wherever. It doesn't matter. But there was this, especially when he was at Alabama, there was this fear that even if you were playing at home, even if you were like a really, really good football team, but that's Nick Saban. That's Nick Saban on that sideline. And like you saw it with Kirby Smart a little bit, where he would he would think too much sometimes when he's playing Nick Saban. He would overthink some things. And then all of a sudden the team looks clunky and they're playing slower. They're doing something. And maybe that's the reason. Maybe it's not. Maybe I'm just projecting a little bit there. But at the end of the day, I mean, like, there was this sort of aura around the Alabama program when he was head coach. That aura, I mean, we don't know for sure, obviously, because we haven't seen what this team looks like under Kalen DeBoer, but I would not be surprised if it's dissipated at least a little bit. He's a really good coach. He's a damn good coach. He's won everywhere he's been. But I'm looking down this schedule. Like, you go on the road and you play Wisconsin week 3. That's a sneaky game. That's a sneaky game, especially because it's before the bye week, and then you're coming in and you got Georgia coming to town the week after that. You've got a road trip to Tennessee. That's not going to be easy. You're at home against Missouri, a team that finished in the top 10 with what was it? With the Sugar Bowl, with a New Year's Six Bowl win that just beat Ohio State last year. They're coming to town. You go on the road to LSU. You go on the road to Norman, Oklahoma to play the new Sooners. Then you have Auburn. I mean, and Auburn's never a game that you can sleep on. So I think the schedule itself is going to be extremely difficult. They had a very difficult schedule last year up at Washington, and he's really good in top 25 games. I don't know what exactly his record is. I think I wrote it down somewhere because it's going to be coming up in our next little group of conversation. But the guy wins at the highest level. I think he's going to win at least 9 games. It would not be surprised if it ends up being 10, but it's not going to be easy by any stretch of the imagination.
No, they're going to have to put up a fight, and I do think you're right about the luster. Teams are not going to be scared. Teams are not going to back down the way that
Mhm.
maybe they would have, and that's something he's got to overcome.
Mhm. Yep, and I've got a random one that's not it's not a Power 5 team, but it's one who I think that's gonna find a lot of success. We don't have to spend a lot of time here on this one, but it's Spencer Danielson at Boise State. I mean, the guy took over as an interim head coach at the end of last year, and I don't know if you've ever seen an interim head coach win a conference championship, but that's what we saw with Spencer Danielson, and he's walking into again one of the winningest programs in college football over the last 25 years, albeit not at a Power Five level, but it's still a really good program. Again, we don't have to spend too much time on this. It's just kind of a sidebar conversation that I wanted to bring up because Spencer Danielson is a great coach. He's elevated from the coordinator position, and he's gonna, I think, have a lot of success in year one.
Well, don't forget they got that USC transfer Malachi Nelson in at quarterback, which is a little bit of a surprise. And look, obviously he doesn't have much experience, but that if you've been recruited to USC, you obviously have a boatload of talent. And so it'll be interesting to see if you can mesh what Malachi Nelson can bring athletically and at the quarterback position with what the team was able to surge and trend and do towards the back half of last year. You can meld those two things, considering the conference you're playing in, considering the schedule that you're going to have to deal with. Yeah, I agree with you. There's an opportunity to pick that up and potentially be in the discussion for top group of 5 team. There's no doubt about that.
Yep. And so, Abe, let's move into some coaches who we don't think, or I don't think, I should say. I don't want to speak for you here, but and you can tell me if I'm wrong.
Mhm.
And let's start here. Let's go to your alma mater, Kurt Signetti at Indiana. I just it's not because I don't think that he's a good coach. It's not that at all. I think it's more the fact that he's walking into one of the most difficult conferences in college football, and this is gonna be a very difficult one up there at Indiana. What say you?
Yeah, look, you're projecting 8 new starters on offense. Some of them, a number of them, transfers, and so you've got to find a way to mesh that together. You are upgrading quarterback. Curtis Rourke is coming in, but quite frankly, it's just a brutal schedule, and that's going to be, a lot of these lower tier, bottom tier of a Power Five conference. I mean, your very first game of the year, I mean, yeah, it's a home game, but it's the Buckeyes. You've got Louisville in non-conference among the other games.
Yeah.
And then you got Michigan, you got Penn State, you mentioned Wisconsin earlier. It's just a very tough schedule. I think there is an opportunity to have a good season, which for Indiana would be like 7-5. And I
Mhm.
think you would take that in his first year. But yeah, you're not in the discussion of top 25, anything like that.
No, I don't think that's gonna be one of those situations. Another one that I'm not 100% confident is Jeff Lebby at Mississippi State. Again, this is not a knock on the coach or the program or anything else. It's just more where the program is in year one. And with Zach Arnett, he walked into obviously a very difficult situation in the passing of Mike Leach, and he was tasked. He was never really given an opportunity to be the head coach. Of course, he steps in and it was a last minute hire as after the passing of the old ball coach. But you know, I think Levy's going to come in and bring a new imagination to that offense. I think he's going to come in and bring a little bit of pizzazz after his time at Oklahoma. He's going to be this team is going to get better, I think, under Levy. But I have a hard time believing that they're going to compete in an SEC that features some of the best teams in the country.
Quite frankly, we talked about this. What were my 3 things? Is just the schedule works against them, and the amount of talent on this
Mhm.
roster works against them. I'll even give them credit. Blake Shapen at quarterback. Remember, he transferred, had a couple great seasons over there at Baylor. But there's just not enough there, Garrett, to be honest. And when you're running into the SEC schedule, there's too many teams that are just going to out talent you. Even if Levy can coach his guys up, there's only so far they can go in year one. It's a tough draw, man. Like it's a tough draw.
It's going to be tough. Another tough draw is Deshaun Foster at UCLA,
Yeah.
a legend with the Bruins. But at the look, Chip Kelly left to go be the offensive coordinator at Ohio State, and I think Foster's going to come in and he's going to be able to recruit Southern California. I think he's going to be able to do that. He's going to connect with these kids and do a really good job. I mean, former players, generally speaking, when they take these kinds of jobs, I think that's sort of that expectation when they come in. But he's got an NFL background. You're walking into a very tough situation at UCLA. You just lost your quarterback. You're moving into a new conference. Your head coach just left to go be an offensive coordinator at a rival, or a new rival, I should say, a conference rival. Hard to call them like a rival. It's with call this realignment, they are going to be in the same conference, which I'm just going to have to get used to. Still blows my mind. But we talk about bad situations. Deshaun Foster is walking into a tough one.
Yeah, I think the bigger problem is that you lost someone to an actual rival, that being the guy that pretty much got this team into that discussion. That was your defensive coordinator, Danton Lynn, going across town to LA to SC. I mean, this was a team that was surviving on the strengths of their defense. And we know some of the guys that were just drafted over the past couple of days there out of UCLA. And that's the biggest question for me. Foster, it's going to take a long time to get this offense up and running. I don't trust the quarterback play. It's a very difficult schedule. And the defense kind of had held it together a little bit, very stingy the past couple of seasons. If that's not the case this year, it's already going to be tough. But if they can't ramp that defense up, even more so, because I don't trust what they're doing on offense, at least not in year one under Foster.
Yeah. So another coach who I think is going to struggle this year. And again, not because he's a bad coach. It's Jed Fish in Washington. He's walking into
too much talent gone.
It's brutal.
They lost the quarterback in the top 10. They lost 3 receivers. They lost multiple guys on both front line. I mean, just before you even get to the fact that they moved into a new conference with a much, much more difficult schedule. There's just too much talent lost, even with getting a transfer quarterback in. I don't know who he's throwing to, dude.
It's going to be tough. That's going to be a tough one.
Yeah.
I mean, but this is a guy who went an atrocious 1-11 in his first season in Tucson, and then 2 years later, he's got a 10-3 Wildcat team.
But I think that's the point. Like all of these guys that we mentioned, even if we're wrong with that first group of guys that you thought would win, like it doesn't have to be in year one. The fact that some guys find it in year one is okay. And whether it's for Brennan or for Fish or for whomever you want it to be, Foster, like we just talked about, he's going to have trouble in year one. I just don't judge them based on the first year. I think that's the point, because you got to let them kind of figure out, get their guys into the system, get other guys out of the system, and go from there. And this is why when we talk about it in college, like you got to give guys two years minimum before you even start making a decision. Normally you'd prefer 3 before you kind of really get a good read on guys. But don't panic just because you start off. You're just trying to set the baseline. And sometimes you set a good baseline like Brent Key did, and sometimes you set a bad baseline. But the moral of the story is that's your baseline, and the plan is to go up from there.
You got to give them time.
Wherever you need to improve from, start improving. That's that.
Another one who I think is going to struggle here is Boston College's Bill O'Brien. This was a program that I don't think was expecting to make a coaching change, but when Jeff Hafley leaves to go to the NFL to go be a defensive coordinator for the Packers, they were in a tough spot. And Bill O'Brien had made his return to college football to go be the offensive coordinator at Ohio State. I thought that was a great job, but now he's going back to his old stomping grounds up in Boston, a place where he's very familiar with after his time with the New England Patriots. But he's in we saw what he did the last time he took over as a head coach at a college football program. It was a messy situation at Penn State, and he stepped in there and he really elevated that group, and he turned them into an actual competitive football team. I think Bill O'Brien gets a lot of undue hate because he's a little off-putting, off-color at times. And maybe that's what it is. And the dude has won at a high level at a lot of places. He did it in the NFL. He led a Texans team that was really good. He coaches a hell of an offense. He coached up Alabama, did a very good job there. But at the end of the day, like I think this could end up being a really interesting hire at Boston College, but it's not much of a football school. And it's one that we haven't seen them really at a high level competing since really Matt Ryan played in the late 2000s. But Bill O'Brien, I think you're just walking into a very tough spot up there in Boston.
Yeah, I'm not as low on this as you are. This is a guy that returns 9 of 11 starters on both sides of the ball. They got Castellanos. They're in the ACC, which is a manageable conference. The non-conference isn't too difficult.
Mhm.
I see no reason why. Now, things would have to go well, and the transition would have to be smooth. But I could foresee this being an 8-4 team if they beat some of those. You got to win those 50-50 games, right? Now,
Yes.
I don't know what you view as 50-50. Florida State's an L. Louisville, maybe, I'm kind of putting it in the category of an L, but like you got a game against Pittsburgh, you got a game against Georgia Tech. Like these are kind of 50-50 games if you're having a good year that you can win. And so I don't know, like I can see this team at 8-4. There's no reason they should be worse than 6-6, which, kind of where they've been in recent years anyways.
Yeah, that's a good point. And Castellanos, I've seen him firsthand. I've seen what he's
Yeah.
able to do on a football
Yeah,
field. And the
exactly.
dude is talented as all get out.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
he can run the hell out of a ball, man. I tell you what. So we'll see. I mean, if he's able to put the ball in the hands of his quarterback and just sort of let him go, maybe that should be enough. And in an ACC, like you mentioned, that is out ripe for the taking. I don't see necessarily a big font forward necessarily, but we saw the team compete consistently last year. I mean, they came down to Atlanta to play Georgia Tech and they kicked them in the teeth. And when they're able to run the ball well, I think that's going to be that's when they were at their best last year. But with Bill O'Brien, I think he's going to bring some more imagination to that
You're
offense,
right.
a
Yeah.
group that really, really struggled at
It
times
feels
last
like
year.
he'll be able to maximize Castellanos for
I
sure.
think he will. I think he will. But another coach moving into the ACC or back to the ACC, I should say, but Manny Diaz. He's look, it's a defensive-minded coach going into filling a void from a defensive-minded coach and Mike Elko, who of course left for Texas A&M. This is a guy who knows the ACC really well. He went to Florida State, coached 6 seasons at NC State, 6 years at Miami. He was just the defensive coordinator up there at Penn State before coming back to Duke. And again, this is just one of those situations where you lose your quarterback, you lose a lot of talent, and guys have left. And I want to see what he looks like. I think Manny Diaz is going to be a damn good coach for the Blue Devils moving forward. I think he's really going to elevate the program or at least consistently maintain that consistency that Mike Elko left. But I think it's going to be a large task to replace the likes of a Riley Leonard.
Yeah, and they're hoping to do so with Texas transfer Malik Murphy. And this is a guy that has competed at times and
Mhm.
really has a lot of talent, but he just feels raw. And if Manny Diaz can unlock that talent, look out because they are returning a lot of starters as well. 10 guys on defense are back for this team. So you talked about a Duke team that was pretty sturdy last year. You bring in, I don't know, Elko's defensive minded too, but you bring in Manny Diaz. Can you kind of ramp that up and at least until Malik Murphy's got things going? I don't know if he ever will get things going. That's the other aspect of this.
Yeah.
Is you put all your hopes in a guy that you saw play 2 games for Texas. He looked good in those 2 games. They won them, whatever, but it's just tough to judge off of that. But the hopes are high. But I agree with you. They're kind of just quite frankly they kind of fall back a little bit from where we felt they were last year before the Riley Cooper injury.
Mhm.
They're kind of in that discussion with Pitt and BC and Georgia Tech, Duke. Like, who's the team that jumps away from 6-6? That's the
Mhm.
question. Like, who's the team that? And you don't have to be Louisville at 10-2, but can someone jump out to 8-4, 9-3? I don't think it's going to be Duke out of that group, but they're all kind of together, and one of them is going to have the sort of year that puts it together. You cover Georgia Tech. I feel like there's a high potential that they're the team that does that.
Yeah.
Obviously, got a tough role against Georgia in non-conference, but they're the team that seems like they're ready to take another step, but who knows? They're one of those group of teams that just, all right, you were 6-6. What can you do now as a follow up? And we'll see.
Yeah, it's pretty clear in the ACC, especially, that you have that top group of school that really that S tier, if you will, which is it's Clemson, it's Florida State, and then it's a pretty sizable drop, and then you have the Louisvilles and everybody else. And I like that take. I think there is going to be somebody else. I mean, unless we really think they've moved away from the old style of doing things, but so it's just the top two teams in the conference that go to the title game. So, but we still, I mean, maybe we do see a Florida State, Clemson, but I do think, to your point, there's going to be somebody in that B level group that's going to step up and have a really good season. And I think Georgia Tech is as good an option as anybody else in that conference. But two more here for you, Abe Gordon, and they're both in the Wolverine state. Number one, Jonathan Smith. I think Jonathan Smith, the new head coach for the Michigan Spartans, is look,
Michigan State Spartans.
It's bad. It's bad. And going from questionable video board content to the actual play on the football field, it seems like there've been a lot of bad decisions made up there in East Lansing. But I think Jonathan Smith is, again, a really good coach who a program that was struggling in the Pac-12 gave more opportunities, and they were rewarded for it. I mean, this is a guy very similar to what we saw with Jed Fish at Arizona. He took over a very bad Oregon State team, his alma mater, and he goes 9-22 over his first 3 years as the head coach out there with the Beavers. And then all of a sudden, he turns it around and he's able to win 10 games. He goes to 3 straight bowl games, and I think really had a good football team last year, and in a different season where you don't have the likes of Michael Penix at Washington and Jed Fish down there at Arizona and everything else going on. I mean, you have Dan Lanning at Oregon. I mean, that was the Pac-12 was one of the best conferences in college football last year. And if it wasn't the case, if it was more like what we saw from the late 2010s, we're looking at Oregon State playing in a Pac-12 title game and maybe competing to win it. That's how good Jonathan Smith got that program to last year. And it's not going to happen year one because he has a lot of work to do in that Spartan culture. But I think if he brings that West Coast mentality where he was able to find some success and jump into the portal, we've already seen him start to do that with quarterback position, his former quarterbacks joining him, Aiden Chillis. And if he's able to I don't know, mirror what he was able to do, I don't know if he's going to get 3 full seasons to get it right. I don't know if 9-22 is going to cut it at Michigan State like it did at Oregon State, but I think year one's going to be a bit of a slog, but I think he can turn around a little bit faster than he did up there at Oregon State.
Yeah, I think it's about managing expectations too. Coming from where you are, I mean, good Lord, if you can get to bowl eligibility this year, that you should take that as a big, big win. But realistically, just like you said, start to lay down the foundation, develop the culture, and then go from there because you are so far off from where you need to be as a program, especially in that conference.
Yeah, and the other one in the Wolverine state, of course, is the one of the most public hires of this last recruiting cycle. It was one that was very expected. It was the promotion of Sharon Moore at the University of Michigan. The Wolverines, look, they were undefeated whenever Jim Harbaugh wasn't coaching, which was effectively half the season last year due to all of the off-field activity that they were getting into. But he had some big wins last year. I mean, he got the win over Ohio State. He got the win over Penn State. Most of their really, there are only 2 consequential regular season wins over really, really good teams. I should say, maybe that's unfair. Maybe that's an unfair statement. But look, he won all the games that he coached at Michigan, but I don't know how Moore builds this program in his image because Jim Harbaugh was there for a long time. Jim Harbaugh had a roller coaster of a run with the Wolverine program. And I wonder what Sharon Moore's going to do because, of course, you're losing 13 players drafted over the course of the weekend. That's huge for the Michigan program. But at the same time, that's a lot of talent that's gone. That's a lot of talent that's gone. And it's not like Michigan recruits at the level of Ohio State or any of those other teams in the Big Ten. And like they're a good team. Like they recruit well, don't get me wrong, but they're not a consistent top 5 recruiting team. They build a culture, they build a program through that sort of lunch pail mentality. And I think Sherrone Moore's going to do well to do that. But losing a guy like Jim Harbaugh, losing that program builder, I think is going to be very interesting to watch. You lose your quarterback, you lose your running back, you lose your leading wide receiver, and you lose your core of your defense. And Kirby Smart, Nick Saban, and these other big coaches at these other big programs at Ohio State, Ryan Day, they've been able to consistently win year over year over year after having that amount of players, a crazy amount of players drafted. We have not seen Michigan do that at a high level, much less with a new head coach taking over. So they're going to be in a really tough spot. And I think you've said it really well, is managing expectations. Expectations are going to be really high coming off of a national championship, but I'm not confident that Sherrone Moore is really going to have Michigan in a spot that they want to be next year.
It's really interesting. We talk about the drop off for Kalen DeBoer, right? And we talk about Nick Saban and how he has to replace him. And it's probably more realistic that there's a severe drop off here at Michigan with Sherrone Moore than there is with Kalen DeBoer. And that's just purely a talent thing. You mentioned it. Like it's just such a mass departure from Michigan again, they've recruited at a very high level, but it is not Ohio State and Georgia and Alabama, where it's just one of the top 3 or 4 classes every single year. And there's that amount of talent to be replenished. This is a year where you're starting a new quarterback, right? You got Alex Orji in there. If I were Sherrone Moore, if I was Alex Orji, I would be turning around and handing the ball to Donovan Edwards about as much as we handed it to Blake Corum the year prior. To me, this is a situation where they have got to be able to run the ball. And the other thing about it is this is not a team that's probably going to win pretty. They're going to have to grind out games. And if that's the case, then that's the case. You can lose pretty, but you don't win ugly. That's a Grant McCauleyism. And whatever it takes to win some games, be ready for that, because I do think that he is a very good coach. I do think they will be well coached. But I also think there are some limitations based on who has gone to the NFL and what I do and don't know about the guys that are in there to replace them. And so that, along with what did we say at the very start of this, the schedule is always going to be working against them in that conference. And that's going to be a tough go of things as well. I mean, I'm trying to remember who they opened the season with. I feel like it's a tough one. No, I guess not. I'm thinking of someone else. They got a couple wins there early on, but they got, you know what? I'm looking at their schedule. It actually is relatively manageable.
Well, you look at Texas, and that's one that's going to come in there. That's going to be a tough one. Week 2 at home.
I must be looking at the wrong schedule. I don't know. I don't see Texas.
No, because you're running through it. You got Fresno State, which that's a win. Texas at home, that's a loss.
I'm looking at the 03 schedule. Yeah, I'm looking at the 2003 schedule. I was going to say, I thought they were playing someone different.
2003.
2023.
Oh my! I was about to say 2003.
that would have been way
man.
Eras, man. But you're right. I thought there was someone difficult for them, and Texas is that team.
USC it's just comes to town.
Going to be tough to get going. It's going to be real tough to get off the ground and get going.
Yeah, if you get out of the month of September and you're 3-2. That wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah.
It would not surprise me at all. Losses to USC and to Texas. That would not be all that shocking. Wow. Texas and Michigan week 2 is going to be a ton of fun. And that's the thing. This is why I have to be careful when I start looking at these schedules, because I start seeing matchups like that and I just get way too excited about it because this, I love college football. I mean, look, we do a podcast on the week during the week just for fun on this stuff, and of course we love it. And I look at these schedules and it just gets me fired up. I'm so ready for college football to be back, and I know everybody watching this absolutely is too. And look, it's going to be a lot of fun, and we're going to discuss all of that stuff right here on the College Football Overtime Podcast. So make sure you subscribe, make sure you like everything, make sure Tell your friends, share it with everybody, and tell us what you think. Give us a rating on Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you get your podcasts. And Abe Gordon, we're about 45 minutes in. We were going to talk about our top 10 head coaches, but I think we'll save that for next week. I think we got to tease the folks a little bit longer, give them something to wait on. So we gave all of our coaches, our new coaches that might have success year one. We think that there's some of these guys who may not have success year one. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun to follow as the season goes. And we'll dive into these schedules a little bit and preview some of these teams the deeper we get into the offseason as we build up to the 2024 season, which I'm sure is going to be fantastic with everything coming to college football next year. It's going to be a lot of fun, a lot to talk about. So make sure you are right here on the College Football Overtime Podcast. My name is Garrett Chapman. His name is Abe Gordon. We'll catch you next time right here next week on the College Football Overtime Podcast. We'll see you there.